Yeah. Okay, a couple of questions from 717 for this week. Both of them really dealing with cultural issues or issues within the news more than from the Roman study, which is fine, totally fine. The first question is, what is my take on the 4 moons in Israel? You know, this week has been really cool to watch just from a scientific standpoint, is the moon passing behind the Earth shadowing it, a lunar eclipse, and then also even last night I saw that it's still blood red, which means it's catching the light rays through the atmosphere of the Earth before it gets to the moon, which is turning it red. And there's reference to the moon becomes blood red, or that kind of thing within the Scripture as a sign of end times. And what are we to think of this? And the short answer is that there's a bunch of additional signs to the return of Christ that are not astronomical, and because of that, I would suggest, could those red moons mean something? The answer is, of course. Anything could be an aspect we should look at for the return of Christ and end times. However, I would also be cautious. That's not the only sign. It's just one of many, many things that Jesus talks about and that the Scripture talks about in terms of end times. And even if it were, I would say this: the primary responsibility of the believer in the end times is also the primary responsibility when it's not the end times, which is to graciously, gently obey Christ, to love His church and love His people, and to share the good news of Jesus Christ with the world. That's the life of the believer. And so to humbly follow God through His Word, to humbly honor God by exalting His Son, to love others, love the church, and love His gospel that goes to the world. So I don't know. I always will watch the news and the happenings and think, oh, that's interesting in light of the Scripture. But I would be cautious about drawing too many conclusions with it, other than just saying, that's interesting, let's see what else is happening here. But in all that, in the end, it should not radically alter our behavior. We should follow Christ humbly every day of our lives. And so that would be my encouragement to all of us, regardless of whether it's the end times or not. The next is the new movie, Heaven is for Real, where a 4-year-old goes to heaven. Okay, a couple things. There's been many, many, many books and even television programs and interviews with individuals whose testimonies are about these kinds of things. And the answer I would give to that is, first of all, I don't know the book or the movie. I'm aware of it, but I've not read it. I have read a book that is called 90 Minutes in Heaven by a preacher who also claims to have had a heavenly experience while dead. And to those things, I would say, first of all, we always fit every experiential thing against the Scripture. And the Scripture doesn't talk a lot about post-death heavenly experiences and then someone coming back. Paul the Apostle, who says that he got lifted up into the third heaven, in other words, in the presence of God, but basically prevented by God from telling anyone about it. So he couldn't even. So here you have Paul the Apostle, unable to articulate a heavenly encounter with God. So that seems interesting that for Paul to not be able to tell that we would get such accurate encounters from other people who are not an apostle. And so I'm cautious about that. Now, John does have an experience. Remember, John is lifted up into the heavens, and his we do get a record of. But I would note that the difference between most of the accounts of heaven by individuals who claim to have died and seen heaven, most of them are focused on man-centered things or human-centered things. They see grandparents and aunts and uncles and things like that. And there's very little exaltation of the person of Jesus Christ. And so I find it ironic that if this person is having an encounter like that the primary purpose of that encounter wouldn't be to exalt Christ if they really were in heaven, where heaven will be primarily focused on that. So since I'm not the one who died and was brought back by doctors and claiming to have this, I can't say for sure because I wasn't in that person's head. And so I'm always cautious about experiential things. I'm always hesitant to just completely dismiss them because I'm not the one who had them. I'm also, though, always cautious. And with that, I would say, what does the Scripture teach? even if that person's experience was real, what would we learn? Are we supposed to then suddenly study that experience as the way to live our life? Or should we say, wow, what would I do if they had visited heaven and come back? Oh, I know. I would go to the scripture and study it on how to live my life. I wouldn't ask them. So I would just say I wouldn't obsess over those kinds of things or think much about them really at all, other than to say, what does the scripture say about what happens to someone when they die? And what does the scripture say is going to happen to you when you die? Those are more important questions. And so I haven't seen the movie. I haven't read the book. I doubt I will. I really don't have a lot of interest in that. To me, the more accurate depiction of heaven is from the scripture, not from someone's experiential testimony. And so on those, I would just say I'd be very cautious. I wouldn't hang a lot on them. I wouldn't spend my life focused on them. I would be very cautious about them, even downright skeptical of them, because they don't seem to fit with much of the heavenly experiences articulated in the Bible. And so that's generally my response to them, is a bit of skepticism, caution, and then a redirection of our focus back to what the scripture says about life, death, heaven, the afterlife, what that looks like. That's where I would direct our attention. Good question, though. I really appreciate it. Both of those have to do with very cultural events from today. We will be back at it 7/17, Easter Sunday night, this Sunday night. See you guys then.